Well, hello there.
Since you're here, let's talk about stats and gear.
So, what are stats? Do they matter? What do they even look like?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. Sha sha sha. Oh. Sha sha sha.
Ugh. Mm. What's 302 times 507?
17,784.
Golly. How you doing? All right, all right, all right.
So, how do you role play statistics? Well, let's start with strength. Most of the time, people will verbalize how their character looks in appearance, and that will be a marker for what their strength is. They'll be bulky, large, hefty, carry a large weapon of some sort, something to indicate that they are very, very strong. But another way to do that is just to play your character in that fashion. Be imposing when you speak. Talk with a deep, gruff voice if you want to. Things like that are what are going to separate you from the rest when it comes to role playing strength.
So, the flip side of that coin, you were describing a high strength character. What does low strength look like from a role play standpoint?
Very good. A low strength character is probably going to be high in another area. You're going to display your best characteristic probably, but when it comes to strength, maybe you run or stay back in a combat. Maybe you slink down whenever you're talking to people. Maybe you show that you are not imposing and instead frail. Maybe your character walks with a cane, even.
Good. I like that. Absolutely. So, moving down to intelligence, I look at intelligence as book smarts, right? Things you've learned from study, from reading, you're learned. Um, you would speak very proper and prim, always carrying yourself with some dignity to show that you are as intelligent as you know you are. The opposite of that to me would be, well, I know a lot of things, but spelling ain't one of them. And you can take them to whatever extreme you want. Play it in the middle. That's up to you.
A dexterous character would probably, a high dexterous character would probably be flashy in their movements and show their agility and move around the board as often as possible. When you speak about your character moving, that they move in a fluid, very smooth manner, and that they're very adept and light on their feet. You would probably use um, acrobatics quite a bit. And but let's talk about one thing real quick. We're talking about the high and low of all of these categories. What does low look like, really, in a number perspective?
Using the standard array to pick your stats, 8 would be your, what everybody calls your drop.
But 8 only represents the average humanoid.
Yes, it's very basic, common folk. You playing most role playing games are going to be very heroic, almost godlike. Think of the Avengers. Think of Batman. Think of any of the heroes you grew up with. They have those 12s, 13s, 16s, sometimes even 18s, right?
That's right. So don't think that an 8, although it is a low score from a statistic perspective, it is truly the average score for the rest of the world that you are in.
So if you have a low dex, don't feel like you can't accomplish the same thing as the player beside you. They just are going to have an easier time accomplishing said task. If you have a low intelligence, don't feel like you have to play the character that eats crayons. You play your character. Let the stats be what they are.
The dice ultimately decide your fate.
Doesn't matter how strong you are. You roll a nat one, you are not picking that log up.
So wisdom.
Wisdom. Wisdom is my favorite. Wisdom to me is world smart, street smart. It is your total accumulation of life lessons that you've learned up till now. You may not know what the poison is made out of because you have a low intelligence, but you know by looking and smelling of it that it's poison. That's the difference to me of wisdom. Low wisdom would be maybe you intentionally fall for that trap. Maybe everybody else knows better. Maybe your character doesn't. Maybe you're the one they have to watch out for. A high wisdom would be the one to, hey guys, I've seen this before. Maybe we should take a step back and check for some things before we walk in here. That's high wisdom to me.
Constitution in the game is it represents vitality. Obviously, it has a lot to do with your hit points in the game, but role playing Constitution might be confused with strength a little bit. Role playing Constitution to me would be at a high level being almost stoic in a sense where nothing bothers you from eating the grossest stuff on the planet to drinking um, and things that you might encounter in battle, even how you handle that from a mental perspective with Constitution. On a low end, you might puke at the sight of blood or pass out. Um,
I haven't
you
thought about that one.
definitely couldn't handle your liquor, and from a physical standpoint, again, you might be frail or small in some stature.
A lot of those I haven't thought about. Those are some very good points. So, probably the one that I normally shy away from at the table is charisma. My characters usually tend to lean toward the low side of charisma. Real life, I have very high charisma. I can talk to anybody about anything. I've never met a stranger. Um, and I can usually get you on my side of the argument pretty quick. In game, low charisma to me means shy, timid on the very low end of the spectrum, whereas the high would be you are the voice of the party. You have just convinced the king to let you take some coffers of gold and take his favorite daughter to the ball.
You had a very good example that we were talking about the other night about choosing a druid of some kind of deformity, something with spores.
Yes, we were talking about different subclasses and classes with another member of our table, and Circle of the Spores came up. I said, it would be really cool to have the backstory similar to Quasimodo or Ephilites from 300. Might have butchered that. It's fine. But to have that deformity from birth and to never establish social skills, right? So then as you're moving through, like we've done in this series, guess what your dump stat's going to be? Charisma.
Yeah, But guess what your most effective role playing stat would become?
Charisma. Absolutely. If you don't have to always play to your highest stat. Um, play to your character, even if it's the lowest. You know, some of the I'm not gonna say dumbest, but some of the most outlandish NPCs that a DM can make can sometimes be the party's favorite.
Consider your lowest stat and your highest stat to be the two most effective places that you could roleplay from to represent your character. Rolling stats, you've got multiple versions to roll with.
So many.
There's a method out there today that some people roll a d20 for stats, and you get what you get.
Mm-mm.
3d6 is the most common, and then you'll roll a couple of sets and choose the best set.
While
If
dropping the lowest.
no,
No.
that's 3d6 is the
Oh.
standard.
Oh.
4d6 and drop the lowest is for a high level game.
Hmm.
That almost guarantees that your characters are above the norm.
Hmm.
And then you have the standard array, or point by, which I don't know who does point by, but maybe some people do.
D4.
Really?
Yeah, every time.
Point by?
Every time.
Does he use that from a perspective of advantage somehow?
When you're building amazing chassis like he does for characters, for the power build, for the ultimate tank, for the guy that can shoot 19 Eldritch blasts in a row, point by is the way he goes.
It must give him more customization for how he wants to address his character.
Sure. I personally think that rolling dice is just chaotic, and I don't want any part of it. I don't like it. It scares me. I don't. I don't like it. Standard array. It's on the app. It's on D&D Beyond. It's free. It's everybody at the table has the exact same number of points. I think it's fair. I think it's efficient. I think it's even, and it does not scare me as much as rolling dice.
Rolling dice is always fun no matter
Ugh.
what,
In game, yes, not before the game.
all through the game.
When we're continuing to talk about role play, I think that gear has a part to play in this story.
Absolutely. It makes it easy if you're talking about sentient gear. That has a mind of its own. But what about gear that just belongs with your character or doesn't?
Sure, you wouldn't want to be a frail, small human wizard that carried around a 6 foot long double headed battle axe. It just doesn't make sense.
Not at all.
Now, from a perspective of what does make sense, let's say you're role playing a paladin, a nature paladin, that took a dip in, let's say, Pact of the Blade Warlock.
Very cool.
What would that look like?
Probably like this.
Oh, well. And see, that makes sense with the character.
I think so.
Yeah. Now, let's say you were playing a ranger, a herald from the jungles. He's going to need a weapon that is more utilitarian, something to help him move through the forest and the jungle, something he can also defend himself with, possibly cook with. It's not a whole lot better than that, than a good kukri.
Kukris are excellent. Gear for me is not just weaponry. Would you consider a familiar gear?
That's a hard line for me. I think it really depends on the familiar. Uh, I think of that more as a companion.
Absolutely, I agree. It is a companion. But if you had a tamed beast, it didn't qualify as a familiar.
Sure.
It was just an extension of your arsenal. Would that be gear?
Count like a boomerang. It comes back to you.
I say that a tamed beast would be gear. There are all kinds of gear that you're going to get access to in the game, depending on the lands that you run through or the campaign settings. From sentient to mundane and just your average stick that you pick up off the ground to defend yourself with. How do you role play those things? You really want to think about that.
Not every character is going to run around with spike boots, pitons, and 200 foot of rope. It doesn't make sense in all stories, environments, or even your backstory.
Gear can be very unique and exclusive to just your character. It can be heirlooms that were handed down to you that don't even fit in the DMG or the PHB. If you get something special like that, or if you design it, make sure you know how you want to role play it. I understand that most of the time when you're talking about items that your character are holding, you're going to refer to what they look like when they do what they do, and you're going to describe those things. But just have that in your mind. It's going to help flavor your character immensely.
Let's go back a few videos for a second and let's look at that chart. I'll lead with the anarchist. They may only have pocket bacon and a cantaloupe. And that's it, because that's fun, and why not?
Because they're the anarchist.
Now, the control freak, on the other hand, would probably have
A pencil and a pad and several scrolls and everything nice and tidy surrounding their person. Quick access to all of their gear would be a big factor for the control freak.
I like it.
The name of the game here is immersion. It's getting into character, flavoring your character the way that you see that in your head, and displaying it to the rest of the group throughout the game. That is how you're going to become immersed in whatever game you're playing. When it comes to stats and when it comes to gear, you want to do your best to role play to those two items. With stats, does the number matter? Yes, it matters. It matters for both the aspect of the mechanics of the game, but it also matters in how you will role play that statistic. And gear, of course, matters by the choice that you make for your character. Going back to the frail gnome carrying a giant barbarian battle axe. It just doesn't make sense. Unless it does make sense.
It can be done.
But if it makes sense, you need to display that every time at the table. It needs to make sense. Funny only goes so far.
Yeah. You can only be the comic relief so many times before it gets old at the table. But really portraying your character, honestly, will never get old.
We hope you join us for our next episode, covering
skills and feats. It's a long list, but I heard it wasn't as long as another game you've played. But we'll get into that next time.
Thank you for joining us.
Like, share, and throw us a follow. Until next time, this is Roleplay University.